Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'm reviewing Fiasco by Thomas E. Ricks. I'll talk very briefly about the author, go into an overview of what the book is about, talk about what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, who I recommend the book to, and finish off with what I'll be reading for next time. Thomas Ricks is a well-known writer. As a reporter, been a reporter for years for both the Washington Post, I believe also the Wall Street Journal, on really the U.S. military. He's written several books. He's won Pulitzer Prize. This book is the first of his stuff that I've read, and it is about the lead up and the fighting in the Iraq War from roughly the beginning of the war to, I'd say, roughly 2006. He does go and talks about Operation Desert Storm, which occurred in 1991, and how a lot of the failures of that, or perceived failures, made their way into the planning for the Iraq War in 2003, the invasion of Iraq. And it is a very good summary of just a very well in-depth talking to multiple people, both journalists talking to people who were inside the administration during the lead up to the Iraq War, just a lot of sources in the military. It gets really the tone of what it was like prior to 9/11 in regards to Iraq. Iraq had been contained after 1991, after Operation Desert Storm. But there's definitely a sense in the military that the job hadn't been completely done. There was money that was being spent each year on a no-fly zone, and after 9/11, between the Bush administration, the intelligence community at the time, and the media, and really a Congress that wasn't very active, a lot of people had felt that they were kind of asleep at the wheel in terms of questioning a lot of the information that was coming from the administration and the intelligence community. Ricks does a very good job of explaining all that, and that's probably the first, I'd say, 20% to 30% of the book. The vast majority of the book is really him interviewing soldiers who were on the ground in Iraq and understanding everything that went wrong. He goes into the psychology of some people. Paul Wolfowitz, there's a large portion of the book that's devoted to Paul Wolfowitz, who in some ways is kind of the biggest cheerleader for the Iraq War. And I just really enjoyed it. I mean, it's a hard read in some ways because it is a lot of understanding just how how many mistakes were made and how they were made and why they were made, and just the giant apparatus of the U.S. military and how it works. For someone I've never been in the military, and so seeing that behind the curtain of the reporting, and that's very, very, very in depth and very, very good. I really enjoyed this book as much as one can enjoy it. It is very gruesome. Thomas E. Ricks doesn't really pull any punches in terms of talking about the violence of the situation. These are men and women who are in combat, and he doesn't shy away from some of the really gory details. He does get into some of the major points that as we know it from that time, as far as Americans who are on the outside. He does talk about the Abu Ghraib prison scandal and how that came to be, and I thought very effective understanding kind of the root cause analysis is what I couldn't think of. So really from a root cause analysis perspective, I thought that was really helpful. And really just the everything that happened in the war, everything that happened on the civilian side, as far as Wolfowitz and Rumsfeld, to the military side with Wolfowitz and Rumsfeld, to the civilian side of it with what they call the CPA, and how those folks were oftentimes at each other's throats. And so it was really an in-depth look at it. If you wanted to know anything about the Iraq War from about this time to the mid-2006, it's a very, very good book. I think he actually wrote a sequel to this. It's more centered around David Petraeus. David Petraeus does make an appearance in this book, and towards the end of the book, there is a shift where things are slowly starting to come together in terms of a shift from the kind of more heavy-handed shoot-first tactics of the military to a more counterinsurgency tactics as that kind of goes along. If there's anything I didn't like about it as much, there's a couple of times in a couple sections that felt a little bit incomplete. He doesn't really give you a breakdown of Saddam Hussein and why Saddam Hussein was considered to be such a thorn in the side of the United States. He doesn't really go into depth on that. So if that's knowledge that you don't have, I don't think there's a lot there in this book. There was at times, it felt kind of like a channel switching where he goes kind of, and now this, because he's covering so many different aspects of it. So everything from the media, their role into it, to the insurgency, and so it just kind of sometimes feels a little bit like channel switching. There's one point, for instance, where he talks about the mistakes that were made by the insurgency in their tactics in the war, but doesn't really go into any detail on that. But those are really relatively minor things. If you're someone who wants to know anything about this point in time in the U.S. military in Iraq and how people who are fighting viewed it, and how there's, like all things when you're dealing with giant organizations, like especially like the military, there's a plethora of opinions. And so I enjoyed kind of getting different opinions from different people, and he does a very good job, very thorough job of interviewing a lot of different people when it comes to that. And he ends the book with, excuse me again, because the book ends in mid-2006. I think this was published in 06 or 07. He does talk about, possible future scenarios for Iraq, what Iraq could become. And I thought that was actually a pretty interesting part too, and a kind of an interesting way to end the book. So that is Fiasco. If you're all interested in learning a really, really in-depth account of the Iraq War, kind of how and why we got into it. There are times where I wish that maybe he'd gone, I don't think to the degree to which he was going to be able to get key sources in the Bush administration and get them to talk to him. I don't think he does. And so there were times where there's a little bit of gap between, one point in time and 2 weeks later something has changed, but we don't know what has changed. But I think that's really just more indicative of how people make decisions than anything else. But Fiasco, Thomas E. Ricks, and next time I'll be reading 100 Years of Solitude. I apologize to anybody who was looking forward to this video and it didn't get to you. I've had some health issues I've been dealing with, but I hope to get back to a more regular schedule here. And so if you haven't gotten a chance to subscribe to the channel, please do. If you like this video, please hit the like button. And I'll go ahead and leave a link below to my Twitter if you want to check me out there. Until next time, bye.